So what's different about Hashgraph? Well, it isn't blockchain. It's totally different. In fact, the way it works is a real mind bender and not very easy for me to explain, but I'm going to give it a try. Instead of a block in a blockchain, Hashgraph calls their packages of information events. Your computer takes a transaction like a payment, or anything else for that matter, such as an action in a video game, an offer to sell merchandise or even sell stocks or bonds, a bid on that item, a contract, or even a law. Pretty much any information or transaction you want to record, and it puts it in the event. For transmitting information quickly, Hashgraph uses a technology that has been the gold standard in computer science for decades. It's super fast, and it's called Gossip Protocol. Your computer randomly tells another computer in the network about the event you've created, and that computer responds by telling your computer about any events it heard about. Then that computer tells another computer about your event and the other events it heard about, and the computer it's talking to responds by telling all the events it knows about. It's absolutely the best, most efficient way to spread information, and it's exponentially fast. But here's the twist. Each time a computer tells another computer about an event, it also includes the information of the time it heard it and who it heard it from, and the time they heard it and who they heard it from, and so on and so on. It's called Gossip About Gossip, and it lets everyone know what everyone else knows and exactly when they knew it in just fractions of a second. The other major component is an even older technology, and it's the most robust, secure, and certain way of coming to absolute consensus. It's called voting protocol. But until now, it was so slow that nobody ever used it. And the twist that Hashgraph has given it is that there's no voting. Instead, because everyone already knows what everyone else knows, you can mathematically calculate with 100% certainty how they would vote. It's virtual voting, and it allows Hashgraph to come to consensus almost instantly. So instead of recording things on a block and then adding it to the blockchain once every 10 minutes, Hashgraph events are added to the system instantly the moment they're created, so they don't have 10 minutes worth of information in them. This means that they're small and they contain far less data, so they use very little bandwidth and are much easier to transmit. And because it's not trying to guess the answer to an incredibly complex math problem trillions of times per second, Hashgraph uses just a minuscule amount of power. From what I've seen so far, compared to blockchain, Hashgraph is lightning fast, more secure, and provably fair. All events are time-stamped the moment they're woven into the system, so the record of whose event came first and whose came second is instant, and there's no such thing as soft forking or unconfirmed events. It can also replace huge portions of the internet that are currently run by centralized servers, by replacing them with the shared computing power of all of our own computers, iPads, and cell phones. It looks like Hashgraph might just have the potential of fulfilling all the original hopes and dreams I had for blockchain technology. The power to decentralize and remove the middlemen from commerce, banking, stock markets, and much of the legal system and government. With the speed at which this technology is evolving, the future is looking bright, and Hashgraph is the perfect example of just how fast things are moving in this field.
Well, I think the really amazing innovation that Leemon has made is in the way in which he has made adjustments to the Gossip Protocol and to the voting system in order to make them compatible at scale, right? Because a voting algorithm can work and you can reach consensus in the exact same way, but in order to deploy that in the real world, the bandwidth constraints on it would be such that you'd never actually be able to practically use it. But by incorporating the Gossip Protocol and creating the Hashgraph, and then being able to use that in conjunction with the local data that you have in memory, and running a voting algorithm locally on the computer without having to cast any votes or send any votes over the internet, you're actually able to get all those strong guarantees that you get with a voting algorithm, but you're able to do it at scale. And that's what's so remarkable. And to be quite honest, it's hard to imagine how no one thought of it. It's one of those brilliant ideas that you could have only looked in retrospect and said, how did no one think of this? But at the time, no one did. So one of the challenges, I think, with any new technology like this is how do you really explain to people, how do you make a compelling case for what makes a technology so compelling, right? And one of the things that's so compelling about this technology is the throughput, it's the speed. And it's you know, you can tell people that they've tested over 300,000 minimum tested transactions per second versus Bitcoin's 3 to 7 max. But like, how do you kind of get that in your head? And I sort of did a back of the envelope calculation, and that's roughly twice the speed of sound relative to a snail's pace, Bitcoin being a snail's pace, and this network literally being like a supersonic jet traveling at twice the speed of sound. Which is, I mean, just wrap your head around that for a second. It's remarkable. It's not even like within, so you can see the difference. It's tremendous. And understanding, of course, that the speed of the network, the reason why Bitcoin is so slow is because they have to make it slow. Because if it's not slow, it would fall apart. It would branch off everywhere. You would never have consensus.
Now remember the explanation of the Byzantine general's problem from earlier and how blockchain was built to solve it? Here's something not many people know. Blockchain systems aren't technically Byzantine fault tolerant. They came close, but no cigar.
So I, like many people, assumed that blockchain was Byzantine fault tolerant. And in fact, I didn't fully appreciate what that even meant. I sort of just assumed it because I saw it as a sort of part of the larger picture of blockchain being very secure and not having been hacked. But in fact, it isn't Byzantine fault tolerant. And the reason why it's not Byzantine is because in order to be Byzantine, there has to come a point in time when you've reached consensus, you know you've reached consensus, and you know you'll never be wrong. And you're never going to change your mind. And that doesn't happen with blockchain because of the nature of the network. The geometrical qualities of the blockchain network require you to always sort of recognize that you're never entirely sure. You're probabilistically more confident that you're arriving at consensus. But that's also why on the blockchain network you need to keep an entire history of the ledger. Because you sort of have to have the capacity to do a forensic analysis in the event that you are mistaken, in the event that the network has forked and you don't know it. And so that's something that you don't have to do with Hashgraph, because with Hashgraph, you're coming to consensus every few seconds, and you can dump the entire history of the network's data and just keep rolling forward because you're absolutely sure that you reached consensus. And that's the difference. I think the major problem, the sort of the big deal in the blockchain community for years, ever since the community figured out that they could take this protocol that Bitcoin was built on and sort of extrapolate it and use it to build these distributed systems, this distributed architecture around storage and computation, etc., and building applications on top of it, is that there was a recognition that it had limitations. It had limitations at scale. And the community has been trying to figure out how to address that while at the same time building apps on top of it. And something that Lehman said, which really has stuck with me, is that while everyone was really busy building apps, they forgot about what the core of distributed technology is all about, which is reaching consensus. And what Hashgraph has done is it has revolutionized that process. We can agree about the things that we're communicating about at scale. And that's a revolution. It's the biggest revolution since the web.
Right. And you were just following your heart to do it. That's the thing. It wasn't. Right. So we've been looking at this amazing new technology for about a week now, and what I find so incredibly amazing is that it holds the promise to solve all of the problems that the other distributed network ledger systems have. Bitcoin, once it started to scale up, it turned out that it used an immense amount of energy to run the system. And also, as it